Hello and welcome to Quit Your Crappy Job, Finding Courage for Positive Change.
Hi, welcome to the Quit Your Crappy Job podcast. I'm Jeff Hughes.
And I'm Scott Willson. And how are you doing this afternoon, Jeff?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, Scott. How are you?
Doing fantastic. And I'm real excited to have our guest today. Joining us today for today's episode is Dr. Bryce Willson. He is a licensed psychologist in the state of Colorado. He got his undergraduate degree from Colorado State, moved on to get a master's in agency counseling at the University of Northern Colorado, and also ended up getting his PhD in counselor education and supervision. His career from that point moved him into working in hospitals and government corrections facilities. And why we're having Bryce or Dr. Bryce Willson with us today is because he moved from that kind of clinical world to a private practice. So he has his own career change story to tell us. And with his psychological background, we thought all of you would be interested to hear kind of a psychologist's perspective on what kind of makes some of us make some of these changes. And so with that introduction, Bryce, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Scott and Jeff. Appreciate you taking the time.
Well, we appreciate you giving your time today. I know you're very busy. So to get things started, Bryce, why don't you go ahead and just give us a little bit of background, maybe fill in the gaps from my intro. Hopefully I didn't brutalize it or butcher it too badly.
No, that's accurate. I went to Colorado State University for my undergraduate, graduated with a human development and family studies degree, for my master's in agency counseling with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy at the University of Northern Colorado, and then pursued my doctorate degree through the same program at the University of Northern Colorado in counselor education and supervision. I also took all the licensure core classes to become a licensed psychologist through the state of Colorado at the same university, and pursued licensure thereafter.
Awesome. And so with your background, well, I guess we'll just start with that. You get all your credentials, PhD, all that stuff, defend your dissertation, right? And you start working in hospitals and in the government correctional institutions. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, during the course of acquiring the various degrees, I started off in the field doing advocate work, some non-clinical work, and then working up in the, I call it the trenches, working in detoxes, working in, areas where there's underserved populations. And then once I became licensed, transitioning over to working on the medical floors in hospitals, emergency department. That for many years. When I got my PhD and was pursuing psychologist licensure, the Colorado Department of Corrections had openings for psychologist candidates. So I went there to my residency or your residency hours for licensure. So
I see.
I did that for about 8.5 years. Damn.
Okay, 8.5 years, that's long enough time to be pretty comfortable, kind of get the lay of the land, know the people, the politics, I guess, all of it.
Sure.
So what makes you become an entrepreneur at this point, Bryce? I mean, you have a comfortable job, it sounds like, if I'm correct. Being an entrepreneur is not for everybody, right? Even for doctors. No. A lot of doctors join established clinics, right? Tell us a little bit what made you want to do this and the emotion and thought process you went through to ultimately pull the trigger and do that.
Well, it has more to do, I think, with my personality. You have to have a personality of one who thinks outside the box. You want to be able to try different things. You want to have the freedom to explore various things. When you're working in either a large bureaucracy for the government or you're working in corporate type model, you have to work within those parameters. There's not much flexibility to explore ingenuity, intuitive means, or anything. The hours of work are very rigid, and there's always a hierarchy of individuals who call the shots, which isn't always the best for patient care. Sometimes they get wrapped up in their politics and whatnot, and it doesn't help with what you're trying to do for your patients. So I found that those, for me, were very constricting, suffocating, in fact. And so I decided that if I'm going to be able to do the things I like to do, set my own schedule, and basically have the freedom to do the things I like to do, I would have to become my own boss. I'd have to have my own clinic. So I just decided to do that one day because I wasn't very happy. I was happy with the clientele and patients that I worked with. Absolutely love that. I just wasn't happy with the bureaucracy or corporate structure. That was just, it seemed to me just so oppressive without reason. And so I one day said, well, I think I'm going to just launch out on my own. So sold my house, moved to the Denver, Colorado area, and opened a practice there and began networking and finding places I'd be interested in doing consulting with, and also accepting private clients.
Now, when we spoke a little bit about that journey, when you just decided to do it one day, you had shared with me, you had heard a quote, I think, from the host of Price is Right or some daytime show. Is that right?
Yeah.
That kind of stuck with you?
Yeah. I remember the guy who does Family Feud.
Oh, that's what it was. Family Feud. Yep.
Yeah, I forgot his name. But anyway, I just one day was watching a video, and it was on every time after a taping. He would take time to speak with the audience and just answer any questions or talk to them. And so he was asked the question of, well, how did you get into this gig? How did you, get into this industry? What's the secret? And so his story was like, well, everybody told me, no, you can't. And I wouldn't listen to it. And I basically just went for it and wouldn't take no for an answer and kept working hard at it, and eventually landed at the talk show gig. And it's been history since. And he says, basically, when you're looking at wanting to be free and do your own thing, it's like standing on the precipice of a cliff, and you have to be willing to take the leap. Because if you don't take the leap, nothing's ever going to change. If you take the leap, you have to believe that at some point your parachute's going to open and you will find a landing spot. And I was like, wow, that's profound. That's hard to do because most individuals are more invested in comfort and security. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to get outside of that comfort zone. They like to have their security in what's known, and so they won't do that. But for me, being in that security to the point of having no freedom was miserable. So I decided to take that leap, and parachute did open. But it's not the, like, just miracles happen to you. Well, miracles happen, but you have to be willing to put in the skin in the game. So, when I moved, my family was okay. We're hitting the ground running. We're networking. We're consulting. We're calling people up. We're saying, this is what I have to offer. And there's a lot of hard work, a lot of hours. So I put in a lot more hours of work now than I ever did working for an organization. But I have the freedom to work for who I want to work for. I have the freedom to say, these are the hours I will be there. Because I'm my own boss and I have a good product to sell. I do good work. So you have to be willing to put the work in if you're going to do it. You can't just say, I'm just going to jump off and somebody will catch me. That's not how it works. You have to be willing to put the work, blood, sweat, and tears into it for it to work.
So did you jump off by yourself, or did you have a partner? Sometimes people will jump and they'll have a partner, because of that security kind of thing.
No, I did it by myself. I didn't have a partner. Because I know what I want. I would have to know someone really well to partner with them.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is my own thing.
How long did it take before the parachute opened? Was it a year or a year and a half, or tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it opened almost immediately.
Okay.
Because first of all, you have to have, if whatever you're pursuing, you have to have the skill set to sell, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
You can't say, I want to be a petroleum engineer. I'm going to jump off this cliff, but I have a third grade education.
Right.
It can't be based in delusion. It's like, here's my skill set. Here's what I know. Here's what I know I can offer. And now I'm going to contact people and say, what would you like to see? And that's one thing. When I started consulting with immigration, I just called them up. I happened to hear about them in the Denver area and drove past their building. I just called them up. I said, hey, are you looking for a psychologist that is licensed in the state of Colorado that speaks Portuguese and Spanish? They're like, absolutely. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's hard to come by getting people to work there.
Yeah.
So it was a consulting gig. So I'm hired on as a consultant. And,
that's awesome.
So that's how that. But it took time. It took. They hired me on as a consultant for 8 hours to start with, and then they hired me on for 16 hours, and then it was 20 hours, and then after they really saw what I could do, they're like, dang, well, let's hire him on for 40 hours, right? And then I can negotiate my contract rate. So you have to be willing to wear multiple hats. I was working there. I was working in integrated healthcare clinic. I was working at consulting at nursing homes. I was at a private practice. So I had multiple irons in the fire. And I was teaching. So all of these irons are in the fire at the same time. And as I become more established, become more stable in my finances, get everybody settled in, then I can say, okay, which one of these irons do I really need? And then I can start being selective and saying, okay, this one's really not my thing. It was a necessary evil at the time. I'm going to pull that away. Mm-hmm. You can start just focusing in on 1, 2, or 3 different venues, and that's also important to keep as well as an entrepreneur. You put all your eggs in one basket. If that basket goes sour, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So it's good to have multiple baskets, just like if you're doing stocks. It's good to have a diversified portfolio. So if one is starting to wane a bit or it looks unsteady, then you can go to the other one and beef it up some more, or you can take that one out while you are still have something going on and add something else.
Right.
So Bryce, let me ask you this, because you mentioned that a lot of, you have the right personality, and obviously a lot of entrepreneurs have certain personality types. I think there's lots of data and studies that bear that out. But the tagline for our podcast is finding courage for positive change. So the question I would ask you is can this be a learned behavior? Are there things that these personality types might do, intuitively, that everyone else could learn to mimic and behave and do something similar to try to do something better? Like we say, it doesn't have to be quitting your job. Maybe it's just asking for a raise or switching a department, but so many just don't want to take that step. Any psychological thoughts or advice on that kind of question?
Well, I'm not an industrial psychologist by any means, but here's what I've noticed for me and others, and working with people. Of course, you can learn how to become more assertive. Of course, you can learn how to have more courage and to face struggles. I work with people every single day on doing that very thing, on putting away their negative, problem-saturated stories or that they tell about themselves, these narratives, and redefining them in something that's much more helpful, not lying to themselves, but redefining it. We all have a narrative about our childhood. We all have a narrative about things that we go through, and we tell the story. But if you ask someone else about it, they might have a different take on that, because that's their narrative. And so if your narrative that you tell is problem saturated, meaning that, I never went to college because of, I didn't have the chance. And I never got the job I wanted because, they just were biased or racist or prejudiced or whatever it may be. Your problem saturated narrative, that's how you tell your story, generally is how you behave and how you approach life. And so you perpetuate that narrative. And so what I do with people is I get them to modify that narrative and start looking at it. It's like, well, okay, so you have some obstacles, but does that necessarily mean that you can't overcome that? Or these may be obstacles, or maybe we can change that, looking at as opportunities to grow and opportunities to overcome. And so modifying that into something that's self-promoting rather than inhibiting, because most people will look at themselves and say, well, I can never do that. And
right.
The answer to that is like, well, of course you can't ever do that because you don't believe you can. And so you never will. So as long as you look at it that way, you will never do that. Now, there are certain biological things that are going to be impossibilities. Like, I can wish that I was 6'10", but guess what? It's not going to happen.
Right.
Okay? However, if I would like to be a proficient basketball player, I can really work hard at that and become very proficient at it. So within my capabilities, physically, intellectually, spiritually, whatever, I can expand those to a point that it becomes an asset instead of a deficit.
And so how do you get someone to make that change, Bryce? I mean, everything you said, I love it. It's great, but people, because I know some people who have these negative narratives, right? How do you get them to take that first? How do you coach them to make that first change of like, oh, maybe I could look at this differently? Does that mean, or is it just that simple?
Well, from a psychologist standpoint, I obviously have to have a good relationship with them, but we basically start and starts with yourself as well. It's like, okay, never ask your clients to do something you're not willing to do. So you have to, look at yourself and help them look at themselves. Like, oh, what part of these narratives that I'm telling, these stories that I'm telling, the reason why I was never the football star or whatever, is it based off of things that are real, or is it based off of things that I'm defining as basically giving myself an excuse, right? So if I'm telling myself I was never adopted by the NBA because, they don't like people who are under 6'5". Well, that's not true, because look at Spud Webb and different people like that who were well under 5 feet
Right.
and worked very hard and performed there. No, I didn't get into the NBA because I never practiced. In fact, I never played basketball. So there's a problem in that narrative that I'm excluding all of these other variables that I didn't put any skin in the game. I didn't do my part to make that work. And so looking at those deficits, a lot of people don't want to look at that. None of us want to look at, okay, well, the reason why I failed is because of me, because of my attitude, or because of me being unwilling to do that.
Yeah.
It's me. It comes down to me. And so that's, where we start, is we start picking apart and looking at, okay, well, how true is this thing you say about yourself, that you are unintelligent and can never succeed? Let's start looking at that. Is that really true?
Would you agree,
start challenging it?
Would you agree, Bryce, though, that in some cases it's just not that you didn't put in the work, that in your particular circumstance you might have to work harder? So like if you're a Spud Webb,
absolutely,
you may have to put in even more work because you don't have some of the gifts that everyone else have that let them start off a little up than you, right? Or
you may have to work 3 times as hard, right? You if you're not Albert Einstein, but you want to be a chemist or a physicist, and you struggle, but if you want to do, you're going to have to work 3-4 times as hard. But if you do, and you put it in there, you're going to get somewhere. You may not be an Albert Einstein, but you're going to be able to work in that area and perform at some level, which is going to give you satisfaction, right? You have to know your limitations, but people put a lot of limitations on themselves because it's uncomfortable. I can't do that, right? People see someone playing the piano at a concert. It's like, I could never do that. It's like, that's right. You could never do that because you don't believe it. 2, you would never put in. These people practice 8 hours a day.
right.
Yeah.
So if you practiced 8 hours a day, you may not become a world-class pianist, but you would become a dang good pianist.
Right. Do you have any experiences or stories of people where they have come in and talked to you, or you've worked with them and they were able to turn things around, turn their life around and become successful? Do you have any maybe a quick example?
Yeah, I mean, every day, pretty much everybody I work with, they turn things around. They start seeing things differently. Let's say if they're working on depression, they start looking at themselves differently, start looking at their possibilities, start rewriting how they've looked at, whether it be childhood trauma or current unsuccess in their relationship or unsuccess in their work. You start looking at it and rewriting it. So you're telling yourself you're not very attractive, or you're telling yourself that people don't like you. Well, you're essentially teaching them not to like you. Yeah, you wouldn't want to like me because I'm not very approachable. Well, that's because you're telling them that you're not approachable. You're acting as if you're not approachable. Let's change that. And I see that every day, One of the things and I love working in prison populations because these are some of the most marginalized and desperately needing services individuals you can work with. But I'll have people in prisons, they got multiple felonies and they're going to get out, and it's like, well, no one would want to hire me. No one would want to work with me. I'm a felon. It's like, well, wait a minute. There's going to be obstacles because of what you've chosen to do in your past, right? There's definitely going to be obstacles that people are like, oh, you have a felony. But how you paint that narrative to people can either be horrifying or it can be inspiring. Right? And so I work with them. It's like, okay, so you've had, but how far have you come? Who are you now?
Mm-hmm.
How you tell your story can be inspirational. And people love hearing the underdog stories of this person had troubled childhood, troubled teen, was involved in gangs, was involved in all these different things. And then when they were in prison, they found themselves, they turned things around, and they decided that they were going to make a change and they were going to make a difference in life. And so when they came out, they worked hard, they went to whatever, culinary arts school or whatever, and they graduated, and now they're working as a chef. And so when people come at them and say, but yeah, you have a felony, it's like, yeah, let me tell you my story and how I got from there to here. And then people walk away and say, that's amazing. Instead of people going, oh my gosh, I'm not going to go there. That's a criminal. They're saying that's amazing, right? So it's all in how they talk to themselves and tell their story to people.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's very.
So it's all in how. Yeah, it's how, I mean, there's a number of people in Hollywood. Tim Allen, he was in prison for drugs, right?
Mm-hmm.
You look, Dog the bounty hunter guy, he was a felon. And there's various people that have been in prison and turned their lives around, and the way they tell their story is inspirational because it gives other people hope, right? So if you tell your story in this problem-saturated narrative, who wants to be around that you're a Debbie Downer? But if you tell it and it's like, look how much I've overcome, that's inspirational.
Yeah, people want to hear stories of how people have been able to turn things around and become successful against all odds. So
that's right. Why? Because it's them. They see them in that person because we all have flaws, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like, if they can do it, if this person who is on the lowest of levels in society could rise up and overcome, what's my excuse, right?
That's a good point.
So how do you coach someone to have the persistence, or as I hear said a lot, the stick-to-itiveness? Because, I hear everything you're saying, and I can imagine somebody going, yeah, you're right, Dr. Willson, you're right. I'm going to go do this. And they go out and reality smacks them in the mouth. They get that first rejection. It could be quite deflating, I would imagine. Yeah. Is there?
Well, definitely. We work on that. It's like, look, the hard part starts when you are doing things the right way, You're not going out and doing things in a nefarious, underhanded way. Now you're doing things the right way. That's when you start noticing all the trials, because you're playing by the rules, and you're going to have people tell you no. You're going to have people discriminate, and you're going to have people get in your way, and you can't handle it the old way. You have to handle it the right way. And so you're going to have these things come up, and it doesn't mean that you're failing. It just means you're now having to go through the trials that you skipped over before. And so, just slow down and work through it. And so we do that. A lot of people I work in prisons, it's like, they're like, I'm doing everything right now. I'm trying to be a good person, and all these bad things are happening to me. It's like, well, not necessarily. You're just noticing them now because you're not going around the back door. You're facing it head on. So expect it. Expect the challenges to come. And then we start working on, facing it differently instead of, oh, well, this isn't fair. God must not love me. He must hate me because I'm having challenges. It's like, challenges are just part of life. How you meet that challenge is going to make all the difference. So when you have a challenge, instead of despairing, saying, well, let's just eat this elephant one bite at a time. Take it one step at a time. And what can I learn from this? Instead of, all it's lost. It's like, what can I learn from this? Because if you keep moving forward, you may at times be set back, and maybe some of these challenges will set you back. But if you keep moving forward, then eventually you're going to overcome these challenges, and then you're stronger and wiser for it. It becomes lighter as you go. So you have to have that attitude of, if it's getting rough and I'm getting frustrated and I'm starting to, that hopelessness is starting to build, you need to be able to take pause And wait a minute, this doesn't have to be all done today. This is a challenge. What am I going to learn from it? Instead of, well, I just want to give up. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that because facing challenges like that, it's a lot easier to work for a company that you have a salary, you have time off that's given to you, paid sick, paid vacation, paid all. That's very attractive, okay? But you're going to have to do it their way,
Right.
follow their rules.
Yeah.
And you don't have the freedom to reach out, branch out, start a new idea. Okay. But there's like, well, I'd rather be stuck in this job that's really not going anywhere than take the risk of failure.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it's just not the rejection, which the emotional side of the rejection and being told no, that negative feedback is tough. It can be tough to deal with, but it's just not that. It's the willingness to keep sticking through it. Going back to your pianist story of like, well, just keep putting in the hours. So you're not going to be a concert pianist, but you're going to be a really good one, and you'll be better for it. Actually.
Right? That's right.
And because I think, I remember trying to coach a young man who was having a hard time in his life, wasn't sure what he could do, wasn't sure what his passion was, Bryce. And I remember asking him, when I looked at him, I was with his dad, and I looked at him, I said, well, wait a minute, how much money do you make? And he told me, he's like, well, you could afford an apartment. He goes, yeah, I guess so. I'm like, dude, you want to lift this depression. I encouraged him to go move into an apartment, and I said, watch what happens when you bear the stress of paying the bills and things, and you buy that first TV you put on the wall. It's your TV. Right. So I think you're going to see the world change from black and white to color. And he did, but it's very liberating. Yeah, but there's stress with it too, right? There's a burden, but it's liberating. It puts a lot of color into life. It's kind of, for me, one of life's interesting ironies. It does.
Well, it goes back to, existentialism, right? You have your different crises, and one of them, if you're going to have freedom, you have to accept responsibility and choice, right? If you're going to have freedom, you have to be responsible, which means that the buck stops here. It's on you. And most people are like, that's too much weight. I can't take that. I'd rather work at this dead-end job.
So, Bryce, in the few minutes that we have left, kind of circling back to what Scott had talked about at the beginning of our podcast, what advice could you give somebody who is, I guess, at the precipice, ready to jump or thinking about jumping into a new role or responsibility, or what would you, the change? It could be just getting up the courage to move departments within a company or ask for a raise. What would you, what advice would you offer them based on all of your years of experience?
Well, one, you have to believe in yourself. Okay. That it starts there. And two, look, the reason why the precipice is the metaphor you give is like, if you jump off a precipice, there's no going back. Mm-hmm. Right. So you have to be willing to put all feet in. Okay. This isn't a lukewarm, this is jumping into it and said, I've got to do this. Two, you have to have the skill set, right? And whatever you're going to be having the endeavor. So you have to have something to offer, right? And even then, businesses fail and whatnot, but you have to have something to offer that people want, a product, whether that be, your psychological skill sets, whether that be you're an engineer or whatever it may be, it has to have some sort of value, okay? So if you don't have anything prepared, if you don't have an idea of what you want to do, you're just like, I just hate this job, I'm going to jump off this precipice. That's going to be a rough landing. Mm-hmm. So you need to prepare yourself and saying, this is the trajectory. This is what I'm going to do. And then the last thing is you have to be willing to bust your butt. You know, I work anywhere from 80 to 90 hours a week. Okay? But I feel free. Lots of responsibility, lots of pressure, but I feel free because I'm the one who calls the shots.
It's kind of a common theme, Bryce. I got to admit, some of the folks we have had on the show that are entrepreneurs talk about working more hours than they did at their corporate job, but they're happier.
Much happier.
Yeah.
You know, working 40 hours for someone who tells me when I can go for my lunch break and when I can go for my potty break and when I can, you know, how I can write my notes, when I can, it's just not me. I mean, some people like being told what to do all day long and being demeaned. That's not me. I like to think.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story.
Yeah. Well, Bryce, we really want to thank you a lot for giving us your time today. The time that you had. I know your time is valuable. As you mentioned, you're working 80 hours a week and you were kind enough to give us just under an hour. Thank you so much. And for your insights. It was great.
Anytime.
And maybe we'll have you back. Maybe we'll do a review some of our guests that we've had and have you kind of break down some things for us or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like we barely started the conversation.
Yeah, we're just scratching the surface, I think, on some stuff here.
Sure. I'd be more than happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, perfect. Well, as always, we want to thank Bryce and Jeff. Thanks for being here with me as always. Please hit the like button on our YouTube channel. You can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe to us on the Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and the like. And of course, you can find all of the episode summaries and the links to everything on our website at quityourcrappyjob.com. With that, thank you all so much and have a happy day. Thank you for joining us today. Listen to us wherever you listen to your podcast. Follow us on Twitter at QuitCrappyJob. Find us on YouTube at QuitYourCrappyJob. Contact us at quityourcrappyjob@gmail.com. Music is provided by Kelton Levitt. He can be reached at kelton.levitt@gmail.com.